Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is TVP World. You're watching World News. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and these are the latest headlines. Anti-government protests in Serbia continue in Novi Sad, where demonstrators opposing President Aleksandar Vučić have blocked the city's main bridge. TVP World's Balkans correspondent Pavel Chevskovsky is on the scene. Pavel, what are the latest developments, and are these protests a major challenge for Vučić?
Well, these protests are a major challenge to the country's President Aleksandar Vučić, mainly because, first of all, because they do not stop. They started 3 months ago, and what you can see around me is, as of now, the culmination of the protests. We are now standing at the beginning of the main bridge in Novi Sad, the Sloboda Bridge. And this bridge, since 3 p.m. on Saturday, is being blocked. And the promise is that it's going to be blocked for 24 hours, which means that the blockade will stop at 3 p.m. today. As you can see around me, there are people here who decided to spend a night near the bridge, near the Sloboda Bridge in Novi Sad. This is why you can see the tents, you can see people in sleeping bags, the styrofoam to insulate them from the cold, also some makeshift kitchen. And they stayed here in temperatures that dropped below 0 degrees Celsius to oppose Aleksandar Vučić's government. So I mentioned that the first challenge to this government is the fact that the protests are not stopping. But another challenge is that these protests engulf an even larger part of a Serbian society. These protests are called student protests because it were the students who started them. However, with time, other parts of the Serbian society joined the protests as well. Behind me, you can see the tractors that are blocking the entrance to the bridge because the farmers decided to join the protest as well. But yesterday, in the crowd of tens of thousands, we saw motorcyclists, we saw former military, we saw families with children protesting. And they are protesting what they believe is the state capture exercised by President Vučić and the current political class. And the protesters are demanding those responsible for the Novi Sad tragedy to be held accountable, and they demand a reinstatement of the rule of law in Serbia. From the protests in Novi Sad, back to you.
Thank you so much, Pavel, for the update, and please keep us posted. Appreciate it. Meanwhile, thousands of people have taken to the streets in Valencia of Spain, protesting how authorities handled the deadly floods that hit the country in October. Demonstrators argue the region was not adequately prepared and that the response was insufficient.
Drums, chants, and traditional Valencian human pyramid performances. The number one demand of the protesters is that the president of the Valencian government, Carlos Mazón, resigns.
Let Mr. Mazón know that we are neither far right nor far left, but ordinary people from Valencia. We are against everything he has done.
Well, obviously he should resign because of the appalling management he showed during the storm.
Valencia was the worst affected Spanish community in the 2024 flood. People have been protesting regularly, calling for the authorities to be held accountable, especially the president of the community, whom many of the protesters accuse of negligence.
It's a shame that he hasn't resigned yet, and if he won't leave, we will kick him out.
The October flood caused by heavy torrential rains has claimed the lives of 232 people. 3 are still missing. The disaster has caused property damage estimated at more than 10 billion euros.
Grigory Mizenichov, head of Slovakia's NGO Institute for Public Affairs, says that tensions between Slovakia and Ukraine are escalating. After Ukraine blocked Russian gas from flowing through its territory to Slovakia, Bratislava accused Kyiv of energy blackmail. Most recently, Slovakian authorities claimed Ukraine was interfering in the country's internal affairs.
Slovakia and Ukraine is now in very sharp diplomatic and political crisis. It's a conflict, it's a dispute. Unfortunately, escalation happened after Prime Minister Robert Fico attacked Ukraine for its decision to stop transfer of Russian gas through its territory to Slovakia. Then Mr. Fico went to Moscow. He met with Vladimir Putin. Of course, in such situation in which Russia is still conducting war against Ukraine, it was considered by Ukrainian leadership as an unfriendly approach. And since the time we are witnessing the signs of escalation in relations between both countries.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada will respond to U.S. trade sanctions with 25% tariffs on $107 billion worth of American goods. His statement came just hours after President Donald Trump imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports and 10% on goods from China, a move economists warn could spark a trade war, slow global growth, and reignite inflation.
Like the American tariffs, our response will also be far-reaching and include everyday items such as American beer, wine, and bourbon, fruits and fruit juices, including orange juice, along with vegetables, perfume, clothing, and shoes. It'll include major consumer products like household appliances, furniture, and sports equipment, and materials like lumber and plastics, along with much, much more.
Both Mexico and China have criticized the introductions of tariffs and vowed to retaliate, though no specific targets or measures have been announced. Political scientist Alberto R. Coll told TVP World that Donald Trump's tariffs are being used as a bargaining chip in trade negotiations with America's biggest partners. Coll believes key members of Trump's administration, including the Treasury Secretary, will ultimately persuade him not to keep the tariffs in place for long term.
I think he definitely intends to use these tariffs as bargaining leverage with both Canada and the United States. I mean, we know that Donald Trump, over the past 40 years, even before he went into politics, always has had this penchant for tariffs and this idea that U.S. allies, including friends as well as rivals, such as China, supposedly take advantage of the United States, by which he means they have trade surpluses with the United States. Donald Trump doesn't like the United States having trade deficits. He thinks that this means lower American employment.
A British volunteer in Ukraine has been seriously injured while evacuating residents in Pokrovsk. A Russian drone attack on the city struck an evacuation vehicle last Thursday, injuring the British driver and 2 passengers.
This is 28-year-old Englishman Eddie, who used to work as a sailor. But when the fighting in Ukraine broke out, he decided to come to the war-torn country. Ever since, he has been working diligently to evacuate people from dangerous situations in battle zones. On January 30th, his arm and left leg were torn off by an FPV drone explosion while attempting to help people leave the city of Pokrovsk.
We had two people from Pokrovsk who we were evacuating. We were in the northwest of the city, just about to get onto the road to go to Hiroshima. When it happened, it was just a mighty flash, a bang. I tried to keep driving, and then I realized I was turning my shoulder, but my hand wasn't moving on the wheel, so I knew it was bad.
The other victims sustained physical trauma due to shrapnel, according to the regional prosecutor's office. The passengers have been identified as a 42-year-old woman and a 48-year-old man.
At about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, before turning to Hiroshima, we were hit by an enemy drone, and the consequences were quite catastrophic.
Eddie was injured when a Russian drone struck the vehicle he was driving. The volunteer from England had his arm and leg amputated. Efforts to evacuate civilians from frontline towns in the Donetsk region have intensified lately, as Russian forces continue to advance in eastern Ukraine. Pokrovsk, one of the region's most embattled cities, came under a mandatory evacuation order in the summer of 2024.
And staying in Ukraine, Kyiv is urging greater pressure on Moscow, while U.S. President Donald Trump has announced upcoming talks with Vladimir Putin. On Friday, Trump said the two leaders, quote, may do something significant. Meanwhile, his special envoy to Ukraine says Washington wants to increase pressure not only on Moscow, but also on Kyiv.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
It has been much more than 24 hours since U.S. President Donald Trump took office, and despite his previous pledges, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine remains unresolved. Trump has suggested that he is in talks with Putin, though he has neither confirmed nor denied whether the pair has already spoken.
Well, we'll be speaking. We'll be speaking, and I think we'll perhaps do something that'll be significant. We want to end that war. That war would have never started if I was president.
While Trump did not indicate what exactly these significant developments would entail, he told Russia to stop this, quote, ridiculous war on Truth Social last month.
If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries.
But it may take more than financial scare tactics for Putin to stop his war.
Putin is fighting a war here for his place in history. He's fighting a war to re-establish the Russian Empire. He's not going to be constrained by a drop in GDP.
Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, retired General Keith Kellogg, has indicated that a realistic timeline towards peace in Ukraine could take months, but probably not years.
President Trump knows where to apply pressure, when not to apply pressure. But more importantly, he knows that he will create leverage with both the Ukrainians and the Russians.
He is, however, not the only one that has put faith in Trump's negotiation skills. Even the Ukrainian president previously suggested that he is hoping for his U.S. counterpart's support in bringing an end to the war.
Trump can be decisive. For us, this is the most important thing. His qualities are indeed there. He can be decisive in this war.
To date, Putin has indicated his willingness to negotiate an end to the war, but insists that Ukraine would have to acknowledge Russia's territorial gains. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has labeled the idea that Ukraine could fully restore its pre-war territory as misleading. He has echoed Kellogg's view that both sides would need to give something up in any negotiations.
That dishonesty lies in the fact that we somehow led people to believe that Ukraine could not only defeat Russia, but also destroy it, pushing them back to what the world looked in 2012 or 2014, before the Russians seized Crimea and other territories.
Zelensky has previously said that he would be open to Ukraine temporarily ceding territory to Russia to end the war.
From the Ukrainian side, it's not about territory anymore. This is all about security.
In January, the new American administration suspended foreign aid pending a review which would ensure alignment with its policy, which is likely to affect aspects of the Ukrainian state's operations.
The fact that we're not consistent in providing what Ukraine needs reflects the fact that we don't actually have a clear strategic objective ourselves. If we had a clear strategic objective that we wanted Ukraine to win or to be successful somehow, then we would have the right policies. There would be no disruption, even with a change of administrations.
Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and it currently occupies about 1/5 of the country. For TVP World, Sonia Gatabishchan.
And with that, we conclude this edition of World News. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.